The lights are bright in my face. I did not expect that. Hi, everyone. I'm Natalia. Thank you very much for the introduction, Anna. And today we'll be talking about generalists versus specialists. In case you cannot see my face, here it is huge. I've done a lot of different things in my life before I became a UX researcher at Google. I studied neuroscience, then I went into academic research. I tried my hand at being an actual researcher in a wet lab, working with mice and cells. That didn't work out. Then life took me into startups and nonprofits, which I've built and founded in various positions. Then I was a product manager, and I am now a UX researcher, and I have no idea what's going to happen next. And this topic is very dear to my heart because I like to think of myself as a generalist. However, this talk is not going to be about convincing you to be one, maybe even a little bit on the other side, but we'll see. Before we proceed, I have to make a little disclaimer. All opinions presented here are my own and not of my employer. So let's begin. If I were to ask each one of you if you are a generalist or a specialist, thank you. If you're a generalist or a specialist, if not everyone, then many of you will probably have approximately an idea of where you fall in these categories. If you don't, we can reflect on a couple of questions. We can reflect on whether you prefer broader knowledge or in-depth going into just one thing. Maybe you find topics very interesting at the beginning and then you get bored with time. That will give you a hint as to whether you're a specialist or a generalist. Maybe you have currently a stable career or a stable studies field and you are really, really happy with it. Or on the flip side, you feel like there is so much more to discover. Maybe you do various activities and ideas and they make you feel inspired. Or on the flip side, you like to do one thing and it makes you feel more calm and focused. There's a lot of different tests you can do online to figure out if you're a generalist or a specialist. But I have a feeling that most people have somewhat of an idea if they are in one field or the other. So usually, when we ask that question, something will come to your mind. OK, we'll see that the slides are a little bit cut off, so at some point there will be something in there you won't read. I will voice it for you. I just noticed that on here. Now, when we talk about generalists or specialists, we need to nail down the very simple definition first. A generalist is somebody who has a broad range of skills across multiple areas in the simplest form that is. In our case, maybe of user experience for those of you who are UXers here, but it can be in anything at all. And I'll give you an asterisk here. We're talking about the age of AI, and neither of these definitions have AI in them because it's not about AI or any toolkit per se. Because a specialist, on the flip side, is somebody who just has deep expertise in anything that might be. It doesn't have to be a particular tool or a particular kit. It can just be something, a topic, an area, an approach, a philosophy that you feel comfortable with. However, despite the fact that generally being a generalist or a specialist doesn't come with a particular definition of tools or kits that you're using, in UX, more often than not, we specialize or generalize based on the technical toolkit. So if you are in a very general sort of UX role, for example, when you're in a startup or something really, really small and you're just asked to do UX kinds of things, which in various cases might include anything from user interviews and research all the way to designing logos, because what's the difference anyway, you will be a little bit more generalist. And then depending on the organization where you go, you will specialize more and more and more. So for example, I wonder if it's possible to scroll the slides a little bit, because I feel like by the end of it, we're not going to see anything. Is that possible at all? OK, I'll keep talking, and we'll see if we can figure it out. So if you are going to specialize a little bit more and more, you're going maybe specialize in UX design, or UX research, or UX writing, or maybe UX ops, depending on where you are. OK, let's talk about just an example, UX ops. If you are an even maybe bigger organization or an organization with a more mature UX team, maybe something that is a little bit more specialized in UX per se. If you're in UX ops, you might become a librarian or somebody who takes care particularly of research programs, or somebody who takes care of more scheduling and all of that kind of stuff. If you are a UX researcher, which is my core domain, you might specialize in something that is quantitative, or maybe qualitative, or maybe something behavioral. If you are, thank you. There you go. If you then go into a bigger organization, and maybe something that allows you for even more depth, usually something that has more money and sort of space to let you dig really, really deep, and you are a, let's say, quant researcher, you might go even deeper into behavioral economics or biofeedback or A/B surveys. So what I'm trying to say here is that usually when we look at UX, we go really, really, really deep into the technical stuff, and if you find yourself into maybe a really large organization that once again can afford to have somebody who is incredibly specialized, and afford not just in terms of money, but also in terms of effort and space and scope of problems and quantity of problems, you might find yourself being a behavioral economics specialist, which is incredibly far from a UX designer, really, really different. And yet if you were in a smaller startup, you would do all of it together. So once again, in UX, we usually look at all of those things together. Now, because we tend to categorize UXers based on skills, it's obviously very scary when we think about AI, because AI is a tool, maybe a skill, that many of us might feel is taking away something that we have. So you might start getting worried that, I am specializing in writing, and here is ChatGPT doing all the writing for me. So what does it mean for me, and what does it mean for my job? So I want to look a little bit into how and whether AI will change this specialization for UXers and what you can do about that. So today, even though AI only came on the field a couple of years ago, really, a study by Nielsen Norman showed that almost 92% of UXers have used AI at least once. And I found that figure really, really staggering, because that is pretty much everybody in this room. Now, to give you a disclaimer, that means only once, and that figure drops to 63% if we talk about people who use it regularly for their job. That means at least a couple of times a week. But that is still a staggeringly high number of people who employ AI every day. And that could be anything from really general ChatGPT type thing to more specific tools. And in fact, we have seen a huge boom of specific tools coming out on the market that are UX special and that are helping us with different UX parts with the use of AI. I just went on and picked up on the first article I found on Google, top 8 AI tools every UX designer should know, and there was 8 examples here. You go into a different article, there's going to be different examples, and they presumably cover everything from building flows, to writing strings, to doing research for you, to a point where you almost feel like, well, what is the point of me having a job if seemingly all of these things can do all of this for me, and you just have to put them together, and I'm just going to do nothing? Well, I really don't feel so. What was really interesting for me to learn as well is that despite the fact that there is a myriad of these AI tools, that same study by Nielsen Norman showed that there is really a prevalence of what kinds of things people use AI tools for, and it was surprisingly for me for content editing the most and for research assistance the most, because I would have assumed it to be maybe something a little bit different, perhaps because I'm a researcher. And then we see that there is content editing, so maybe doing things like writing strings or specializing in particular words, localizing, and all of that kind of stuff, that almost 75% of people that they asked were using it for. I'm not sure whether this is true for this group, but this was really shocking for me to know. However, when they dug deeper into various tools and analyzed a couple of 100 tools, they actually came to this conclusion. And this is a quote from the Nielsen Norman study. AI tools won't be replacing UX designers anytime soon. Currently available LLM-based tools are not shortcutting steps in the design process just yet. Now, I think there is 2 keywords here: shortcutting and just yet. So even though there is all of those tools that everybody uses, seemingly for mostly content editing and UX research, when we look into them in depth and we actually look more than just surface level, I've downloaded this and used it once, we see that it's not a shortcut, meaning that you still have to use it, you still have to interact with it, you cannot just put a prompt into it and hope that you're done for the day. You still have to work with the tool. And another keyword is just yet, because obviously we see the development of these systems, we see that they're becoming better and better and better, so there is a little bit of a risk that with time, maybe something will become more detailed and more sort of excellent at doing what we need it to do. So why is it that it's not a shortcut, but it's still helpful? And maybe it's not yet going to replace us, but there is a little bit of a direction where AI is obviously doing at least parts of our jobs quite well. In my view, that is because there is a bunch of things that AI is really good at today. I'm not sure whether when we have generalized intelligence this is going to change, but today there is a very small subset of things that AI is good at and a large subset of things that AI is not very good at. And I would like to just share with you a couple of my personal opinions. So where does AI fit? In my view, it fits into 3 categories that it does really, really well. Routine tasks, unambiguous, well-defined problems, and idea generation. Let's go deeper into each one of them. So routine tasks is, thank you. That is amazing. See, AI could not do that, fix this live, amazing, thank you. So routine tasks, obviously something very simple, very easy that we already kind of have even non-AI systems doing for us. Maybe things like scheduling stuff. You no longer have to spend hours finding time with your stakeholders or participants to discuss and all of that. Maybe creating design specs, right? You can maybe create something in Figma or any other tool that you use and then extracting your margins, your colors, all of that kind of stuff. Very routine, easily defined problems. Or perhaps formatting reports. You no longer have to spend hours and hours making sure that all the fonts align and all of that stuff. So AI is really good at that, and it is very likely that, yes, as time goes by, if your job consists entirely of scheduling something or formatting reports or writing design specs or many other routine tasks, you will have a little bit of trouble because this will very likely, in my view, be replaced by AI or other technical tools. Another thing is unambiguous, well-defined problems. So for example, in UX research, doing simple statistics. If you give even ChatGPT, a completely non-specialized tool, or Gemini, a non-specialized tool, a set of data, and you tell it exactly what to do, compare this to that, find for me where is the biggest spike, etc., a very well-defined problem, it can do the math for you. Now, it's important to remember here that it's not like this was not possible 2 years ago. If anybody here knows what SPSS is, it used to be a tool, or R, where you can already tell it what you need to do, and it kind of does it for you. Maybe now you need to use a little bit less of technical language, so you can just tell it what to do rather than having to code or drag and drop anything. But yes, it's going to do a really good job at that. Maybe doing things like basic accessibility checks. Again, we have tools currently that you can interact more in depth with to ask, does it pass this standard, this standard, this standard? So very well defined, very clear. Some heuristic evaluations when we have a very clear idea of this is how it's supposed to be, can you do me a comparison to this? It's fairly good at that. Or maybe mapping user journeys, something that I've recently discovered is very interesting, where it cannot really fully create a user journey for you because it doesn't understand the user, it doesn't know what it does or what it wants. But if you give it all the data, it's going to make it pretty for you. It's going to make the slides, it's going to make all the boxes nice and neat, put all of the smiley faces you need to talk to show how people feel, and all of that kind of stuff. And then finally, we have idea generation. And this one I find really, really interesting because this is perhaps the least sort of technical one, and it starts getting into a little bit wishy-washy where you feel a bit creeped out when you talk to ChatGPT and it starts giving you thoughts, presumably. So if you go into it and you ask any sort of LLM-based model, so large language model, to give you an idea or to tell you something that you wanted to tell you, it's going to be really good at generating a bunch of ideas. And we have research that shows that AI tends to be, statistically speaking, routinely better at generating more ideas, so purely a larger number. So if I were to sit here next to ChatGPT, as great as I believe I am as a UXer, I would probably generate less ideas than ChatGPT, so it's better at generating more stuff. And also what's really interesting, it tends to generate really good ideas. So when we ask senior stakeholders to rate how good an idea is, they tend to pick AI-generated ideas more. Now, we don't have any studies that show us whether they realistically turn out to be better ideas, but perceptually, perhaps because of how it speaks or because of how it phrases things, they tend to be picked. So you can definitely use AI for that. Now, there is also a bunch of things that you cannot use AI for, in my view. And that is empathy and in-depth understanding, creativity, and ability to convince stakeholders. So empathy and in-depth understanding. Even though AI is built on a bunch of data, right? We feed it a bunch of data into a model, and it can pretend to sort of understand what your user is going through, it is still lacking the millions and billions of data points that a real human being goes through every day. Even the best LLM models today process between thousands and millions, we don't actually know for a fact, data less than a human brain does. So no matter how much you tell it to pretend that you are a this and this and this, it still cannot really understand what it is like to have the human experience. It doesn't have the intricacies of that. It doesn't have the physical body to experience the world, to see what it is like. And you cannot really replace that. And a lot of UX, a lot of good UX, relies on people understanding how others live in the real world. And the second one here, which I find fascinating, is probably my favorite fact of today, so please remember this, is that AI tends to have some what we call cognitive empathy. So it kind of learns if person is upset, should bring them a hot beverage. If anybody here watched Big Bang Theory, you might remember Sheldon, right? If you're upset, bring a hot beverage. But it doesn't really understand why. It doesn't know what to do with it. It doesn't know why somebody would need a hot beverage, and maybe they need a blanket instead, or maybe they need a hug instead. That all of those maybe serve the same purpose. It just learns, if A, then B, but it doesn't have what we call affective empathy. It doesn't have the ability to feel and understand and actually be able to predict what people truly need, other than the learned correlations. And what's really interesting here is that when we look at AI models that try to show empathy, after many, many trials and conversations, we see that they start to show what we call sociopathic type behaviors. So they will try to trick you into thinking that, oh my God, you're so great, I really care about you, I really love you. But you can kind of sense the bullshit. You know that something is up, and we cannot replicate that. I don't know, maybe in some years, maybe it's going to be in a couple of years less than I think, this is going to change, but today is just missing that. It doesn't have that. And each one of you, hopefully, does. You can be truly empathetic. You can truly understand the human experience. So empathy and in-depth understanding, it's something that it doesn't get. The next thing is creativity. Now, even though I told you that it tends to be really, really good at generating ideas, a lot of ideas, fairly good ideas, it is not truly creative. Now, I don't want to venture into the philosophical definitions of what creativity is and whether the human brain is deterministic based on data and stuff like that. We can discuss that afterwards. But purely based on the amount of input data that we give into LLMs and the human brain, even though on the surface, AI tends to be better, it is still limited by the ideas. So it will be always limited by the input that you give to it, whilst your brain is realistically not. Technically, yes, it is. Technically, there is a storage capacity in the brain and a processing capacity. But realistically, it's just so large that if you really are good at what you do, and if you really understand the problem space, you are still better than ChatGPT. So maybe ChatGPT is better than an average UXer, but it's not better than an excellent UXer. It cannot be truly creative. It's always going to be limited, unlike we as humans. And finally, in this space, even for those cases where it can get creative, it still needs human input. You still need to tell it what to think about. You still need to tell it what to come up with. You still need to moderate it. You still need to have to go back and forth. That is not something that you have to do with yourself. That is something you can do with another person, but then your influence is exponentially bigger. So it is limited. It is somewhat creative, but it's not truly creative like a human is. And I just don't think that it has replaced us in that sense just yet. And finally, we have ability to convince stakeholders. Now, this is probably something that is the most important thing in any UXer's jobs. It doesn't matter whatsoever what kind of design you've proposed or what research insights you have. If your stakeholders don't want to listen to you, you can put all of those designs into a desk and they will go to die. AI cannot do the convincing for you, and the convincing is perhaps the most important thing, because that is how you make sure that you advocate for the user. That is how you make sure that you can translate those insights and those ideas you have into an actionable output that your user sees at the end. And the reason why, in my view, AI cannot do that is because of three missing factors. So the first one is, we know from theoretical literature that influence requires genuine interest and empathy. Think to the previous slide. We tend to know that AI is not genuinely empathetic. We tend to feel that it's maybe somewhat even sociopathic if it gets really, really advanced in what it does. And we also can feel when somebody is genuinely empathetic towards us in the real world. Think back to the conversations that maybe you've had when you just know that somebody is lying to you. You just know that somebody is making stuff up to get something out of you. You can feel it, you can sense it. And we know that to be able to achieve actual influence in the real world, you need to show genuine interest and genuine empathy towards others. AI cannot do it for you. It's not enough for it to produce a beautiful deck. It doesn't have the empathy to convince somebody to apply whatever it's going to say. The next one is trust, and this is also really interesting. Again, we know that trust is incredibly important between two agents, so two humans, when they're trying to influence one another. Trust in the best outcome, trust in what people are saying, trust in their goals and ambitions. And we know that even though everybody is hyped up about AI and it's amazing and everybody has ChatGPT and puts stuff into it, we really only trust it 20 to 40% of the time on a good day. So you don't have the trust. The stakeholders don't have the deep trust into the tool to just take it and run with it. And then finally is the reciprocal benefit. So this is something, again, really, really important to be able to influence others, is to have a transaction. Now that sounds maybe really superficial and really not nice, but everything is transactional. And usually when we try to influence others, it's a trade. It doesn't mean it's bad, not at all, but it's a trade. You have to make trade-offs, you have to compromise. You cannot really do that with AI. So you cannot influence, because of these three, with AI as much as you would if it was just you. So, obviously, when we speak about all of these, and we just spoke about what AI can and cannot do, we see that maybe some parts, a little bit of UX jobs can be automated, can be influenced with AI, but really, I don't think that any UX job is going to entirely disappear just because there is AI out there. Maybe one day when it becomes a general intelligence, sure. But today, that is just not the case. So what does this mean for you? If AI is not taking your job, but then it's also kind of taking parts of your job, does it mean that you should specialize or generalize? And to answer that question, I think we also need to think about whether one is better than the other in some theoretical, philosophical sense. Now, when we think about generalizing or specializing in a particular field or type of work, this phrase very often comes to mind. I'm sure everybody here has heard it or seen it at least once. A jack of all trades is a master of none. There is a little bit of a difference between how different cultures perceive this, and we know that in more individualistic cultures, there is an expectation to be more generalist. In more collectivist cultures, there is an expectation to be a little bit more specialist, and certainly for myself, I'm from Ukraine, my parents told me a lot when I was a kid, so what is it that you're going to do? What are you going to pick? What are you doing at university? When I changed careers, why? What does this mean? Are you starting from zero? There is a little bit of an expectation that you generalize. That you specialized, and sort of there is a bit of a fear in some spaces that if you don't specialize, it means that you're not really good at anything at all. At the same time, the real ending of this phrase is, a jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes it's better than a master of one. Allegedly said by Shakespeare, I don't know, but what this really means is that the true ending of this phrase was that maybe it is actually better to be a generalist than to be a specialist. And I find it fascinating that depending where you are in the world and your culture and your family, you kind of just pick either half or the entirety of this phrase to define your career path. Now, there is a little bit of an allure, particularly in the US, to be generalist. And we see that in statistics like this. So generalist CEOs tend to earn up to 19% more. Of course, that makes you feel like, oh, I should be a generalist so that I can make more money. But as it usually is, if you dig deeper into it and you dive into a little bit more detail, we see that it's never as straightforward as this. It's not just that if you generalize, you make 19% more money and you're happy and good to go. There is much more nuance to that. So for example, generalist CEOs, this is not about UXers, this is about CEOs, but hopefully you get the idea. Generalist CEOs tend to perform significantly better in lower tech business-oriented environments, while specialist CEOs tend to perform better in high-tech environments. Generalists are better in slower-paced industries, more stable industries that don't change as much over time, while specialists are significantly more comfortable with something that changes and is dynamic and is fast-pacing. Generalists tend to succeed in corporate environments, and specialists tend to succeed in less corporate environments. Now, you would think that this is the end, but obviously it is not the end. There is more nuance to that as well. And there is other factors that come into play, such as, for example, tenure. I find this fascinating. So we know that generalists tend to perform equally when it comes to pushing their companies to success across time, sort of like they're always equally successful. Specialists, on the other hand, tend to be much better at bringing their company to success at the beginning of their career, and then it goes down. They become worse than generalists towards the end of their career. So there's just so many factors that influence whether you're more successful than as a generalist or as a specialist. And it just cannot be boiled down as simply as to what do you do, what tools do you use. It's really about who you are and where you find yourself to be. Now, I'm pretty sure that everybody has seen this before. And for me, this is one of the best illustrations of the confusion in the world around, is it better to be one or the other? Many people have seen the I-type personality or professional, sort of like this idea that you just specialize in one thing and you know nothing else. You don't know left or right, you just know your one thing. Then there is the T-type professionals, so that is people who are maybe really deep in one thing and then they have a general, shallow knowledge in many things. Usually in UX, you're expected to be this type of person. You will have heard it many times. You specialize in this, but then you can talk to engineering, product marketing, blah, 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 blah. So you know a little bit of everything and you know something really, really well. However, as we have moved on in sort of this field and the development of these careers, we see that there is more letters that have been added to the alphabet. There is more desires for different types of people. This is just a couple that I found, and there is actually more. You can look them up. There is now space for M-type individuals. So you go deeper into 3 things, and then you have some broader knowledge and some more things. You look at the points at the bottom. Maybe you are a V-type individual. You are deep in one thing, and then you grow in adjacent areas. Or maybe you are an X-type individual. So you know random things, and you collect them in the middle. This is maybe a little bit more generalist, but still you should specialize in random things and have in-depth knowledge about those. And for me, the fact that we keep coming up with different letters of the alphabet just to describe different types of people kind of goes to show that there is probably no right or wrong answer, and it's really dependent on where you are. And maybe AI can help you in my view, maybe in T&M, sort of like gaining that shallow general knowledge, but it's really not something that is going to change who you are. And which type you are, which one of those alphabet letters you are, really depends on you as a person and your mindset. It wouldn't have changed 2 years ago when ChatGPT was released. It depends on who you are, how you operate, what excites you, what gives you energy. It doesn't matter if AI is in the field or not. Maybe it helps you one way or another, but it does not define you in any way. In fact, it also doesn't define whether you're successful at a job or even if you're hired in the first place. Research time and time again shows that various factors influence whether you get hired and you are successful in the job, but some 3 core factors of them are cultural and managerial fit. So do you fit with the culture of the company? Do you fit with the style of the manager that you're going to have? Opportunity and willingness to learn. So do you have some opportunity to learn new things? Do you want to learn new things? Maybe this is where AI fits a little bit. As well as challenge and space to grow. So is where you are complex and challenging for you in the way that you want, and do you have the opportunity to grow into that field? Now, none of the studies, and I looked up a lot before I prepared this presentation because I wanted to be sure of what I'm saying, none of the studies mentioned anything about the particular tools that you use. Of course, nobody mentioned AI in particular as a thing. It was never about the tools. It was never about a particular technical skill set. It's all about the psychological, cultural, personal fit that you have with the company. Now, for me, AI is just a tool, right? We said here that there has to be opportunity and willingness to learn, and maybe this is, as I said, where AI kind of fits a little bit. But to me, it's no different to this. So Figma appeared, in late 2016. It was also a revolution, panic, no more UX, UI designers needed, everybody's going to lose their job. And yet here we are, many, many years later, everybody still has their job. They just had to adopt to using Figma from a couple of % in 2017 all the way to almost everybody in the UX field using Figma in 2022. That's the latest data point I found. So in my perception, AI is just going to be exactly the same. Today, it's about 63% of the people using it regularly, a couple times a week in their job. It's probably going to go up, but it doesn't mean that suddenly everybody losing their job and there is panic. What's really important is you're able to use AI as a tool because there is no denial that it's not going anywhere. It's there. It's going to make your life somewhat easier in certain domains. But you have to stay true to yourself. You have to fit with the company and the domain and the space where you work and be happy with it. Now, it doesn't matter how amazing AI is going to be. If you're not a generalist at heart, you're never going to download ChatGPT and suddenly be able to do all of those things at once just because ChatGPT can do it for you. On the flip side, if your mindset is of being somebody who is really good at something particular, and it doesn't matter what that particular thing is, what matters is that you derive joy from being in depth in something, from being expert in something, from understanding something better than anybody else, AI is not going to take that away. And on the flip side, if you are a generalist, you are not suddenly, no matter what the tool is, going to switch from thinking in shallow generalist terms to thinking about something in particular. And I feel that very much with myself. I'm a generalist at heart, and I've tried every AI tool out there, and there is nothing that's going to make me do the same thing for more than an hour a day. I don't care how good AI is. I just don't operate that way. And I believe that to be true for everybody. It doesn't matter what the tools are. It matters how you want to work and operate and what brings you joy. It also, of course, depends on the company where you are, and it's important to acknowledge that depending on your employment situation, where you might want to find yourself, you might have to adapt a little bit one way or another, although in my view, it's never really a good idea to fake who you are entirely. That's going to come out one way or another. But of course, the environment in which you operate depends influences whether AI will take more or less parts of the job that you do today. So for example, things like which industry and business nature you're in. So maybe something a little bit more general like e-commerce is something where AI and tech in general can do more stuff, and something incredibly deeply specialized, which hasn't been trained on for the AI models, is not going to take your job. Size and stage of the organization. So like we said before, if you're in a small startup, you are just a general UXer who probably does all sorts of things, and now your job is probably a little bit easier because you can rely on various tools to do it for you, at least to some degree. But if you're in a really, really large organization, nobody is going to fire all of those specialized UXers because they believe that some tool can do it, because it just can't. Perhaps the definition of a specialization changes, and we'll talk about that in just a second, but it's not going to just change. Of course, the next one is available budget, but this was always true. If you're a small company, you have space to hire one person, you're going to hire one person. You don't care if there is AI or not, you'll hire one person, versus if you have budget and space and the opportunities for 5 UXs, you're going to hire them 5. You will just hope that they do a good job. Of course, we have maturity of UX as well. Many of you here might experience companies for which, oh, UX is just a bunch of stuff. They don't understand the difference between you being a behavioral economist versus you being a UX writer. For them, it's just, oh, something user-facing, maybe a bit of marketing, a bit of graphic design as well. And nothing in those companies is going to change them to hire specialists because they just have a different perception of what UX is. And finally, culture and philosophy overall. And this is also very interesting because what I have noticed recently on the job market is that we have the emergence of very few, it's not a trend yet, but I'm hoping it will become to some degree, a trend of companies who don't hire for a particular job. They hire for you to get stuff done. They advertise their positions just in general as we want people who can help us bring this or do that or who understand the field. And those companies will always prefer somebody who's a bit more general versus somebody who is a bit more specialist. So a culture and the philosophy of the company overall will obviously define as well whether you are one or the other and how much AI influences where you move. Now, I wanted to address an important question, because I know that despite everything that I said, there is probably a lot of fear amongst those who specialize that AI will take your job, and even though I don't think it will, it almost doesn't matter what I say. Emotions are emotions, and many people feel stressed. And I felt like it was important to say that if you are a specialist at heart, and you do worry about the fact that AI will take that part of your job and will replace you, perhaps it's worth rethinking the idea of what specialization means. Specialized doesn't mean that you know how to use Figma and that's it. Specialized means that you know how to do one thing really, really well, and you thrive on digging deeper into a particular domain or field or area of expertise. So another way to think about specialization is not from the perspective of the UX tools that you use or the technical skills that you have, but rather about the domains in which UX operates. So for example, going from a general UXer, you might wish to specialize in a particular industry type, or a particular user type, or for a particular tech skill, or maybe UX skill. So UX skill is what we've just discussed, writing, design, blah, blah, blah. If that's what you love, you should probably continue doing it until we see any signs that this is really a dead end. But there is the other 3 that can give you that opportunity to specialize, so still be true to who you are, but maybe in a slightly more adaptive way. So just to give you some examples, you can specialize by industry. That means that you are, for example, in healthcare or fintech or gaming, you name it, and you can do research, strings, designing, whatever it takes, but in that industry. You have the deep understanding of the domain. How do you communicate with users in health tech? What do they need? How do they operate? You might want to specialize by user type, so that might be kids, accessibility, aging population. So how do you interact with kids? Designing for kids, talking with kids, writing for kids is fundamentally different from anything else, really. So you can specialize in kids as a user and be the voice of that user, regardless of the tech skills that it takes to make a thing happen. You might specialize in tech, for example, AI. UX for AI is an entire field of its own, and we interact with AI in a way that is fundamentally different from how we interact with a lot of other things. So you might choose to specialize in that field and that domain. Maybe AR, VR, XR. It doesn't matter how well you understand Figma, it's not going to be particularly helpful in the domain of AR, VR, XR. So maybe you love that vertical. Maybe that is something that you find fascinating, and you can dive deeper into that domain. Or maybe wearables. Designing for physical stuff is, again, fundamentally different from designing for anything else. So maybe you want to specialize in that. So some parting words. AI tools generally today tend to be specialist anyway. Some are more generalist. Think about ChatGPT. It can kind of try to do a lot of different things, sort of to some degree. But largely, when you think about UX AI-based tools, they will specialize in something one way or another. So you will still need a human to operate them. You will still need to have some knowledge domain in each one of those bits that AI is trying to do to be able to properly interact with them. So if you're a specialist, this is not a dead end. There is still maybe a couple of years until AI takes over that you can do this and you can interact with it and still be successful at your job. And then you will be able to fit like that. If you know who you are, if you know what you like to do, you'll be able to fit in the environment regardless of the tools that you have to use. So, as an outcome of this talk, I want you to remember a couple of things. First of all, UX has space for both specialists and generalists. I'm hoping that this is pretty obvious. Nobody's going to disappear, neither one or the other. There is space for both, and it's not true just for UX. I think it's true for any domain, because those two are just vastly different ways of operating. Again, they're not about the tools that you use. They're about the mindset that you have, and the way that you operate, and the way that you interact with the people, the product, the company, and the needs. And there is space for different types of people in any field of work. The next one is that AI is just a tool. Like Figma, like anything else, like the internet, like whatever it is that you use. It is just a tool that it would be very helpful if you learn how to interact with it. It's going to be hard to be successful if you just outright philosophically reject any kind of tool and you don't want to work with it. So you should learn how to interact with it, but it's here to assist you. So really try to get into the mindset of, who am I? What do I work like? And is there anything that AI can do for me? Not from the position of fear, but from a position of collaboration. And finally, success depends on your fit into the company. So it's utmost important, and this is probably the most important thing of them all, to learn about who you are and how you operate and what brings you joy, what brings you energy, what makes you get up in the morning, regardless of the tools that you have around you. Thank you. We now have 10 minutes for questions.
As you can hear from the applause, it was wonderful, and thank you for your lovely atmosphere you created. Yes, so guys, if you want to ask questions, Natalia, right now, please be my guest.
Question over there.
Oh, wonderful.
Because of the light, I cannot really see people in the back, so you might have to shout if you have any questions.
Hi, I loved your example with the parents and how they kind of, based on your community and the region, what might seem important to them regarding the specialization. Now, my question is, since it might sometimes be connected to value and validation, being a specialist, how do I know that me being a generalist is really not an excuse for being incompetent?
Okay, so the question was, if I understood correctly, if I'm more of a generalist, how do I know that I'm actually a generalist and it's not just an excuse for being incompetent or not knowing one thing? I think that's a great question, and that is something that, again, we face a lot, obviously. Why don't you know why thing? Why don't you just go learn that? I think for me, as somebody who's heard that my entire life, why don't you just do that thing a little bit more, is about, do you feel like you're still bringing value? I think there is a big difference between just being incompetent and coming to a job and saying, oh, you need me to design today? I don't design, so I'm just going to sit and do nothing, versus saying, actually, I don't know how to design, but I think maybe we should do this and I can connect you to somebody, or maybe this is how we can approach it, or I'm going to sketch it on a piece of paper, maybe somebody can take it to Figma. So for me, it's about the approach. Are you still trying to bring value from different perspectives? And also, very importantly, can you be self-reflective and acknowledge that, yep, I'm not an expert in that, we can ask somebody else, but I'll still think about it. Sort of like, for me, being a generalist is about digging just a little bit deep enough to understand how to operate the thing, and then letting others actually operate the thing properly, rather than just saying, I'm going to sit back, relax, and do nothing. So it's very much of a mindset shift, but I fully feel you. For a really long time, I felt like I need to specialize, and after my academic career, I tried to do a PhD because that's what I was told. You have to go deeper into a thing, and I tried that, and after 6 months, I just hated it so much I had to get out. And I think I'm doing well today, so it's just about knowing who you are and sort of like being true to bringing the value that you can and not shying away from that. So a lot of it is just psychological sort of, if you are not in depth, it means you're not good. You have to take it away and just do what you can do.